All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to another MassMedic webinar. Today we are here with our friends from Alira Health, and we're going to be talking about their latest CDMO report. Before I turn it over to them, I do just want to introduce myself. I'm Nicole Owens, the Director of Marketing Communications for the organization. If you're not familiar with MassMedic, we are a trade association that works to bolster the medical device industry through education and connection, events like this, advocacy, and awareness. A few housekeeping notes. We are recording the webinar today, so everyone who registered will get a copy of that. And we definitely encourage you to scan the QR code on the screen here and download the CDMO report so you can read all the great content. You'll also get a link to that in the follow-up email. We are going to have time for Q&A, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen anytime they occur, and we will do our best to answer them in the time that allows. All right, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carlo. He is a partner in the Transactional Advisory Group at Alira, and he's going to kick off today's webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We appreciate the opportunity that MassMedic gives us to present yearly our research and insights on the global medical device CDMO landscape. This tradition started 5 years ago during COVID, when MassMedic first asked us to provide a report on a very important theme for the MassMedic community, which was contract manufacturing and supply chain management in MedTech. And it feels really incredible that 5 years later, we're here with our series of articles and publication and insights. And thank you, MassMedic, for keeping us honest and continuing to raise the bar of our efforts. We always try to make our article insightful and provide new angles and new perspectives. This year, a report which you can download from our website, my colleague may share here in the chat section the link if you haven't been provided one already. I was saying this year we decided to continue our coverage of global medical device outsourcing trends, but to focus specifically on an analysis of the European landscape, meaning that as we've done for a few years with a focus on the US market, we decided to deep dive into the fabric of contract manufacturing in multiple European territories. And the goal of that is really providing a more comprehensive global coverage of trends. We give a sneak peek of our report less than a month ago at MDN West, when we had a very insightful expert panel. And one of the key trends that was validated by these experts is the medical device industry is shifting towards a regionalization of supply chain. This means that the Americas, Europe, Asia, Pacific, and the rest of the world will have their own clusters, their stronghold of operations, vendors, suppliers, and logistical systems to support time to market and bring devices to market. I think what the world went through since COVID and during a period of disruption in global supply chains really taught a lesson, and the system is responding, and there are long-term plans to establish and strengthen this regional presence. Of course, this has a tremendous influence on the footprint of the industry from a manufacturing standpoint, but creates tremendous opportunity for medical device outsourcing organizations to structure themselves with a global offering of services and the challenges that come with it, right? An industry that historically has been polarized based on smaller shops, reflective of the talent of engineers and practitioners for the local markets, is now really becoming a professional global process-oriented industry to make to meet the demands of OEMs, but even more importantly than that, to converge with the broader trends in healthcare, which are driven by patient outcomes and deliver better procedures more efficiently and in line with the regulatory and policy trends of our industry globally. So within this background, we develop our insights based on our practice, professional practice and expertise working with customers. Alira Health, if you will allow me a brief infomercial, is a global advisory platform dedicated to the life sciences. We have a clinical and regulatory affairs group, a strategy and market access group, and our transaction division that Sophia and I represent here today. We do not only cover the CDMO market. We are technology and clinical experts. These insights has helped us to understand and navigate the trends from market applications that have trickled down or rather upstream in the value chain. In the CDMO space, we interact with entrepreneurs and investors in two capacities. On one end, we are transaction advisors, so we support the sell side, typically entrepreneur-led or private equity-backed organizations in mergers and acquisition. Our strategy group is really expert at supporting financial sponsors and corporations in assessing the commercial value of their M&A targets. We have participated in over 100 transactions in less than a decade, so playing a big part in the consolidation trends that we're going to comment on today. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Sophia, who will walk you through the core of the presentation. I will be back in about 20 minutes to provide some insights on the M&A trends and then to host some Q&A. Before doing that, I would like to thank Sophia and our other colleague Eve Ogden, who have authored this report with me, and thank you for your passion and quality that put into this. I'm sure it will show from your words here today for the audience. Sophia?
Thanks, Carlo. Thanks for the warm introduction. And hi, everyone. Also, thanks, Eve, for the support in this report, as Carlo mentioned. In this 20 minutes, I will start with an overview of the MedTech market performance. Then I will discuss what are the global trends in the CDMO landscape. Then deep dive into Europe and present a couple of countries as an example of the analysis that we conducted. And then I will give the floor back to Carlo to discuss the M&A trends. So starting from, let me see if the presentation moves forward. Yeah, starting from the MedTech landscape. So MedTech from 2022 to 2023 grew less than 5%. And in vitro diagnostic was one of the main detractors, surely impacted by the decrease of COVID-19 testing. However, we've seen significant growth in the orthopedic business with new innovative implants and materials. We've seen a strong growth in cardiovascular, driven by the increasing prevalence of disease as well as the awareness around them. And in surgery, we've seen a sharp growth driven by minimal invasive procedures among other practices. Couple of words also about the MedTech capital market activity in 2023. So we observed a decline in terms of deals volume. We didn't observe any initial public offering, and this underscores the persistent challenges in the industry. the MedTech industry did not decrease only in volume, but somehow also in value. And we've seen an overall reduction in what we call the mega deals. Some companies undertook strategic reorganization through carve-outs or spin-off. And also, if we focus on earlier stage companies, we have seen more risk aversion from investors to putting in a lot of money in new companies. And in general, the venture finance funding market saw negative valuation readjustments compared to previous years. Significant amount of the insider-led rounds to drive the capital raises. So the 2023 capital market was not at its best in the MedTech space. However, we do still see strong interest also in early stage technologies, in early stage companies, and this demonstrated by the large number of VC funds that were funded in 2023, so ready to deploy money in the years to come. But focusing on the market that interests us today, so the outsourcing market. The outsourcing market experienced a growth of more than 11% and reached $81.5 billion in 2023. Jointly, the European and the US markets represent 55% of it, with the US slightly outperforming Europe, both in size and growth. The two regions have high-value services to a long-standing clientele. However, we need to point out some of the differences between two countries. So Europe is a conglomerate of countries that have different regulatory and market access characteristics, different labor markets and cost structures. And as a result, the fabric of the medical outsourcing is more fragmented. And as Carlo anticipated before, European original equipment manufacturers tend to work with local vendors. And so we're seeing this shift towards manufacturing domestically to stabilize also supply chain and mitigate risk of disruption, as well as being able to better serve the local and respond to the local requirements, for example, from a regulatory perspective. Local sourcing drives shipping costs down, of course, and enables stronger partnership between CDMOs and the OEMs that are present in the territory. The lower inflation also impacted the market positively, and the market is expected to grow also in 2024. The restraints, what impacted the market negatively in 2023? Of course, the lower funding to new innovation, new programs somehow impacted also the manufacturing of these devices and the design and development of these devices. And the predictability of the demand is always difficult. Therefore, this may impact purchasing order and the inventory management of CDMOs. But so this year we added this European focus to because we believe that European market represent major opportunities for American investors and industry players. US players will look to European firms as an opportunistic window into new customers. And we have seen the US-based CDMOs that have already expanded in Europe have some success capturing new demand. So we complemented our research by assessing our US research that was conducted before by assessing 330 plus players with a footprint in Europe. Footprint meaning companies headquartered locally or in foreign territories. We mapped their capabilities, location, and the end markets they serve, and really tried to build the market bottom up. In this pie chart, as well as in the table below, we divided the players identified in terms of science. And what we can say is that all of the large CDMOs, this represent the European MedTech outsourcing revenue. So then all the large companies and a third of the medium represented here are organizations that have a US headquarters. And showing even more in detail, so in the top graph, we have the split in terms of country of origins. And if the US players represent only 16% of the total number of CDMOs that we identified in Europe, they represent nearly 50% of the total revenues of the CDMO European market. While if we sum up EU4, UK, Ireland, Nordics, and Switzerland, they represent nearly 75% of the players that we identified, but less than half of the revenues in Europe. So compared to the US players, European players are small, but they are mighty. And let me give more color on our finding in the European countries that we assessed. So zooming in on Western Europe, we see how the footprint of CDMOs vary a lot depending on different economies, the traditional manufacturing competencies, and the presence of certain original equipment manufacturers in each region. In countries like Ireland, the UK, France, and Italy, we tend to see small, highly specialized players that generally stay confined within domestic borders. On the other end, Germany, Switzerland, and the Nordics feature larger firms with a more international reach. So each region is highly recognized for some technical specialization. And if we were making a hashtag to call out their most prominent offering, we could say that the UK and Ireland boast design and development capabilities. Germany and France offer strong component manufacturing. Switzerland has advanced precision manufacturing, while the Nordics supply electronics components. Italy has a strong focus on injection molding in the medical device space, while we observe that in Spain, injection molding firms also cater to other industry like the automotive. Countries can also be world-renowned for some end market they serve. One example is France, that is world-renowned for orthopedics, which is also one of the fastest growing medtech segments right now. Of course, not all of the CDMOs in the region behave the same. The nuances to that are represented. We try to represent them in our report, and we brought a couple of examples today. As a first example, we had to bring Italy. It's well represented by our speakers here, but also because it has a great manufacturing history in the life science space. So the slide may look a little crowded, but if we focus on the top left, we see the players that we identified. So out of the 59 players we identified in Europe, 75%, so 44 are headquartered there. And if we now focus on the pie chart that shows the footprint of the Italy headquartered CDMOs, we see that out of these 44 players, 86% of them, the vast majority, has only footprint within the national borders, and only 14% of them have a global or a footprint outside Italy. So we know that Italian market is very peculiar as it's very fragmented. 90% of the firms generate less than 10 million in revenue annually for this segment. And yeah, they serve national, and most of them serve national and local clientele. They, in some cases, are clustered in regional hubs. So OEMs can still leverage the synergies between different CDMOs in a region. One example is the Mirandola district, well known for tooling and plastic injection molding. Plastic injection molding is one of the most important capability in Italy, offered by 38% of the players. Of course, not all the Italian players are small, notably multinational global companies, JDS, Borla, Stevanato Group, are world-recognized entities that provide high-quality services worldwide. Then, on the other hand, I wanted to show Germany. And that's kind of an opposite country, shows different company characteristics compared to Italy. We have identified 80 CDMOs, still 60% of them, 46 of them are headquartered in Germany. But if we now see the footprint of Germany headquartered CDMOs, we see that more than 60% of them have manufacturing locations outside their national borders. German players are overall larger, with 1/3 of them generating between 100 and 500 million of US dollars yearly within European MedTech space. And they offer often very integrated services. Large portion of them offer design and development capability, as well as more than half of them, as well as packaging and assembly and packaging. So really larger integrated players. So what we've seen is that German CDMOs commonly cater to other industries beyond the MedTech, like the automotive or the consumer goods. So Germany features a long and storied manufacturing history of an established network of OEM, also present in the countries, Fresenius Kabi, Brown, Siemens. Actually, first I mentioned have manufacturing capabilities, in-house manufacturing capabilities too. So you can see just between these two European countries, with an historical presence and historical capabilities in the outsourced space, outsourced MedTech space, their offering varies a lot. The characteristic of each country varies a lot. And in our report, we try to show other key countries, how other key countries behave. We believe that monitoring this trend, monitoring these differences is important on one side for OEMs and customers to try to find the capabilities and suppliers in each region, and from the CDMO's perspective to explore eventual M&A opportunities. And I will now leave the floor to Carlo, that will explore more how M&A performed in 2023 and what we expect as key trends for the next years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And just as a note, the report, if you will download it, will provide a coverage of other territories and deeper insights. So we appreciate your feedback and hope that you will find it very interesting. So shifting gears, I will now, in the next 10-15 minutes, discuss the M&A landscape. Industry consolidation has been one of the main elements of interest, really, that put this industry on the stage of global private equity investors, and so monitoring M&A activity is paramount. It's actually where our activity in the space generated at Alira Health. This slide provides a snapshot of deal making in our space in 2023, which was very robust. Collectively, 2023 outperformed the prior year, 2022, in terms of number of deals, against the expectations a little bit, I would say. Sophia commented on, the macroeconomic weaknesses and, capital market weakness that, affected 2023. So definitely a decline in activity was expected, and a decline in average valuations. That didn't happen. The market was very robust. It showed both continued add-on activity by established private equity platforms, as well as the formation of new investment platforms. It featured major exits and mid to large cap deals, more than in the prior years. So this overview showcases really the health of the capital industry invested in medical device CDMO. Now, a few particular trends that we observed in this backdrop. Certainly an increase in cross-border transactions. The pie chart that we see here in the middle, we don't have a reference with prior years, but I can testify the ratio of out of US transaction is certainly increasing, meaning that market players are targeting capabilities located in other regions, and now that global consolidation is not limited to the US borders. The number of deals involving cross-border acquirers but targeting US targets is also on the rise. This has been noticed over a multitude of years, and this just reinforces the perspective of a truly global industry where market players are deliberately trying to establish operations globally in multiple regions in proximity to their customers, and to leverage that proximity, of course, to the end market, but also where the OEMs are based. And I was mentioning at the beginning of this presentation, just a general trend that we've observed and we've been able to validate with the OEMs of establishing a vertical integration of services near the customers. That is certainly confirmed by the trends in M&A and what emerges from the data. The target capabilities of M&A transaction that we show here at the bottom left of the slide, maybe they don't give an idea of the discrete characteristics of specific deals, but it definitely shows diversification, right? And a tendency to move upstream in the value chain in order, to acquire and integrate design and development capabilities, component manufacturing, and really this is a clear vertical integration play that is influencing different kinds of players, both large, mid, and small. I think it's a playbook that is now really notorious, right? And the activity of private equity that serves as to ignite the formation of more diversified platforms of services, more cost competitive, more differentiated from a capability standpoint, means that these this trend of creating vertical integrated one-stop shops is not limited to the to the larger company, as we may have appreciated just a few years ago. I think target markets are obviously an angle worth mentioning. What we observe is that the higher value procedures and devices and capabilities, targeted to this type of more sophisticated engineered devices, attract the majority of deals, and certainly the higher valuations. So orthopedics have been a big driver, cardiovascular consistently over the past few years, and minimally invasive surgery, and so forth. not surprisingly. I mentioned valuations a couple of times. This is the first year that our articles will not provide a chapter or a focus on the analysis of average M&A transaction valuation. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is these deals tend to be increasingly private, and there's a kind of a tendency not to share publicly the terms of deals. And so let's say the statistical pool to interpret this data is becoming smaller and not as robust as it used to be. On the other hand, we are deal makers. We participate in a dozen transactions a year, and we can certainly provide some qualitative perspective on what's happening in the market. At the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, as I mentioned earlier, there was a bit of concern about the sustainability of the macroeconomics and of the fundamentals of this industry. We came off the COVID years with a little bit of hyperdrive of M&A, where investors, proved willing to pay strong premia to buy growth inorganically. At the beginning of last year, but already at the end of 2022, there was a bit of a shift in momentum and in perspective. These concerns surfaced, and investors became a little more disciplined and cautious, I think, in participating in auctions, bidding auctions, and looked at really specifics to their business case before making investment decision. This means looking at the synergies, at the post-merger integration, at the customer service, and kind of long-term strategic fit of their M&A targets. What these are turning to is certainly longer M&A processes. It takes longer to sell a business and to find a match. Bidding auctions are less crowded. There is less competition. There are fewer players really are willing to pay premia, I guess. And I think I attribute that to the discipline of really finding a more narrow path to creating value through M&A. Surprisingly, this has not had a major impact on M&A valuations. In fact, I would characterize M&A EBITDA multiples as pretty stable and consistent with the prior years, because despite auctions and processes being less competitive, there is still a very strong appetite for inorganic growth, and the advent of global cross-border acquirers, maybe cross-industry acquirers, has contributed to sustain the interest of strategic and financial sponsors. And so I think this shows, regardless of the volume of deals, really as an element that will sustain and a resilience of M&A valuation. So unfortunately, we will not find specific data and insights in our yearly report on this, but we're always welcoming interactions with our audience, and we'll be very happy to provide more insights in our opinions. These slides also feature some major deals, that happen in the year, multi-billion-dollar transactions. I think this exhibits a tendency, first of all, of now mid to large private equity-backed platform that are finding an outlet in the M&A market, generating large exits, and an appetite for larger private equity funds to participate in secondary buyouts, which will be a huge source of liquidity, and obviously where the market is leading, even greater, faster industry consolidation. I believe I have a transition slide here. If Sophia, you may move. This is just a reference to our a section of our report. It's a census of all private equity platforms that we are tracking. We have identified more than 69 globally, and we try to do a good job of reviewing activity. Each of these platform may be bound towards an exit through M&A or IPO, and at the same time will be an aggregator and on the buy side of an igniting continued industry consolidation. So this is one of the sections of our report that is most appreciated and generate a lot of interaction. So I hope you will enjoy this year's edition, which is even more complete and accurate than the priors. I would leave you in the next couple of minutes with some considerations on trends, without repeating myself on the broader consolidation. It's been clear from the chart here to the left that since 2020 there has been an acceleration in the formation of new private equity-backed platforms, and that this has had a multiplier effect on M&A activity. Since 2021, we've had a record number of deals. Now, of course, this creates a very deep pipeline for continued M&A for the years to come. Will it mean that 2024 will have more deals, more activity than the prior? It's hard to say. For sure, the demand will continue to be strong. I think we're starting to enter in an environment where there is a mismatch between mid and large buy-side players and their requirements they will need in their M&A targets to really be able to execute efficiently and integrate and create value for their customers. So this gap is starting to surface, and it will certainly create some hurdles in the M&A activity. So there are, despite the robust tailwinds, there will be still challenges, and I think that the disciplined approach of investors to M&A will continue, and investors will become ever more sophisticated. So if you're an entrepreneur trying to sell your business, I think appreciating the challenges and the complexity of the buy side of M&A is going to be very critical, and navigating these trends will become ever more challenging. But regardless, there will continue to be appetite for M&A, and we'll be very happy to monitor and continue tracking these trends. So I think the outlook for the industry is very positive, and we'll continue to attract capital investments and continue to fuel a globalization trend, rather a regionalization on a global scale, which in turn will provide ever more value-add services to the OEM, career opportunities for the practitioners, and contribute to innovate an industry that is really the backbone of global medical devices. So we're privileged to have these point of view of observer and market participants, and we'll certainly continue to report on these trends in the next few years. But in order to do that, what we're going to need is the support of the community, and I of course invite everybody to reach out to us and provide your point of view. Tell us what we did wrong, and what trends we should and you would like to see emphasized in the future, and continue sharing your expertise, which is very important and critical to our reporting activities. So with that, I will wrap up our live presentation, but here are our contact information in case you want to reach out to us. But we have quite a few minutes available now, so I will pause for a second, and I would really love to give the opportunity to the audience to ask some questions and keep it interactive. I'm going to give
I
a...
think, yeah,
Yes?
apologies.
Go ahead, Sophia.
Now, in the Q&A section, the question have been posted. Would you like me to read them, or you can
No,
go
I got it. Thank you. I got this. So somebody is asking to share the presentation. The presentation is an excerpt of our report, which you can download from the link that was posted in the chat section a few minutes ago. So you will have a even broader, bigger insight, into these trends. First question: why do MedTech OEMs prefer using local CDMOs? So why OEMs do leverage local vendors? There's multiple reasons. It really depends on what services and how critical they're seeking, and how critical they are to their business. Proximity to engineering partners, for example, is very important to keep an efficient workflow and ensure time to market of the innovation program. So having engineering talent at reach is ever more important. Having a vendor that is really integrated with your supply chain and your manufacturing facility and your distribution centers is critical to minimize logistic and inventory costs and serve your customers and hospitals with good, minimal time to market. So overall, it's a risk and resources management issues. I think we came off the early 2000s, where there was a big trend of offshoring production and outsourcing to China and other offshore regions. That it has certainly is come back, particularly for higher complexities value services where proximity to the customers and the market are becoming more important. Okay, I have a few questions now coming up. One asks, what are the expectations regarding strategics or private equity participation and contribution to M&A in 2024? It's a great question. It's hard to predict. In the last couple of years, private equities have slightly outpaced strategic in terms of number of deals, and these shows kind of validate the number of new private equity backed platforms and how those businesses continue to pursue inorganic M&A. So that's a major engine of deal making. However, strategics are being really active as well, and very competitive. I think the participation of strategic players and corporate players was critical to sustain and push up valuations, because they're less sensitive to profitability and let's say revenue accretion than financial sponsors have, and so they can afford to look more at the long-term intangibles of the businesses they acquire. So there will be equal stakeholders in the continued trend of industry consolidation. And I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing some major private equity exits in the direction of large strategic players, or for some private equity backed platform that have now reached a certain global scale to pursue the IPO market in 2024 and beyond. There's a very interesting question about speed to value. I will try to paraphrase this, and I imagine that what we mean by speed and value, we mean growth, growth trajectory of a certain business and the relative valuation in the M&A market. There's a very direct correlation. In fact, I would argue that, without getting too technical, when we, the trend of pricing a business based on a multiple of their EBITDA performance, it really translates into two parameters. One is the growth trajectory of the business, and the other is the intrinsic profitability of the type of service they provide. The greater the profitability typically means more complexity, more value add application. But the growth is a major element of this equation, of this paradigm, because high growth means good clientele, robust, and when your clients grow and you grow as a vendor, grow with them, it means that you are able to retain their trust, lock them into long-term relationships, and you typically defend your market share in a more sustainable way. So absolutely, growth is a major component of M&A valuation. If you can prove that your business is growing at market or faster than market, it means that you're doing a great job and you will be worth more than your competitors. I would like to take a pause and push this question to Sophia. Sophia, in a nutshell, this is one of our audience. What is, in your opinion, the main difference between European and US CDMOs?
It's a tough question. I would say that, again, Europe differs a lot in different countries. So it would be hard to give the same answer for speaking as countries presented before, speaking about Italy or about Germany. What we're seeing is overall a concentration of capabilities and real expertise that has been developed in the country. So another example can be Switzerland, where we can see real precision manufacturing companies that do not serve only the medical space, but other industry like the watches, for example. So what we're seeing is that the US is more like a market as a whole, while Europe features unique capabilities based on the history of the country that maybe developed MedTech manufacturing after they had already expertise in other industries, and they expanded their expertise in manufacturing something with a manufacturing technique to the MedTech segment. So that would be my answer. I think the difference is how the market is diversified in Europe, and still key capabilities can be quickly identified across the different countries. I don't know, Carl, if you want to add something on that point, and if you agree with me.
You did great, and you allowed me to rest my voice for a couple of minutes. Thank you. I have another very interesting question. An anonymous asks, what is our view and our research say about OEMs' expectation with respect to the choice of CDMO partners? As opposed to formulating my own thoughts, I'd like to kind of relay an insight of the panel that we hosted at MD&M West a month ago, specifically on this trend. And I would say, again, to emphasize a trend that was mentioned today a couple of times, regional presence is key. Being able to provide services in proximity of the end market is becoming more and more important. But there are other factors that have been self-evident for several years. One is innovation capabilities, and innovation in terms of ability to deliver innovation to market quickly and efficiently. So robust engineering capabilities and talent, but also process innovation, and to ensure scalability and quality at affordable cost. Ultimately, it comes down to the specific technology capabilities that the outsourcing partner can contribute with respect to the customer side's, core capabilities. at the panel, we had a senior supply chain and vice president from Edwards Life Sciences. He commented about, wanting to outsource to the right, to the right vendors, technologies that they don't possess. So they're looking for really technical expertise and efficiency and ability to handle complex projects. One of the other insights that came out from that discussion was also the rate of innovation. And they positioned this issue in a very new way, to me at least. When we talk about industry consolidation, we tend to, just visualize an increase in the scale of these operations, right? And maybe more diversified capabilities and more capillary presence, globally and over multiple facilities. But the key glue that, keeps everything together is really people. And the ability of CDMOs and vendors and, engineering teams and operations teams to solve problems for their customers. And sometimes at the greater the scale, the greatest, the more sophisticated the processes, that ability of problem solving and showing up at your client's facility and solving a problem for them and reducing the cost or finding a technical solution is reduced. So one of the words of cautions that these practitioners from the OEM side preach where let's keep it a people business, so ability to innovate, problem solving capabilities over everything else. And then of course we have the cost sustainability, and having a global well integrated supply chain is a critical component of that, among other factors, and I would add, this is from another thing that I already mentioned today is vertical integration. One-stop shops are really the thing, and sometimes the ability to navigate the client's program from design development into prototyping into scale manufacturing seamlessly, reducing the technology transfer cost and maintaining quality is really paramount. And we see that a lot of smaller players are really competitive and able to deliver that to their customer, which is fantastic to see, in a highly competitive market. I think we have time maybe for another couple of questions. So I have a couple of questions here on China and Asia. Unfortunately, we are not focusing our research right now on the Asian markets. It's, of course, an area of expansion of our research that we would really like to incorporate in future editions. We have been a little passive, towards China and offshore manufacturing locations for a couple of reasons. Since we started producing these reports and this research, there has been a clear insourcing or near-sourcing trend. So we tried to shed light on that, but there's no doubt that China and Asia Pacific continue to remain, a very important component of global supply chain, particularly with regards to high volume, devices and components and material sourcing. So that's a huge portion of the market, accounting to approximately 45% of the global industry. So we will certainly strive to cover that more precisely and in the coming years. I have a question about CDMOs, that focus on design and development business, so contract design operations. We certainly work with a lot of those and appreciate that there are a lot of small and mid-sized engineering shops around the country with very sophisticated capabilities, great teams, great talent. We do monitor that they're being targeted by more established CDMOs to join forces and contribute those engineering and innovation capabilities to the whole value chain via M&A. A lot of those companies still remain independent and will serve, and the how to scale design and development services is definitely a big, an outstanding question and a major theme of interest from M&A players. So definitely a trend that we've seen in the last few years and will continue in the future. Let's see. I'm skimming through the questions. I think we may have another one or two. It's time for another couple. Okay, so this is a question specific to the M&A environment, and it asks how acquirers, buyers, and investors approach customer concentration risk when they buy, execute on an M&A opportunity. Customer concentration is definitely can be viewed as a risk, as and an opportunity. A big driver of why investors pursue inorganic growth via M&A is to accelerate their business growth trajectory and acquiring new customer relationships. So there's no doubt that acquiring a company that has great customers is a major value and driver for M&A. Now, when that M&A target has a lot of their business concentrated among a few OEM customers, that's a risk, and that's typically reflected into a lower valuation, relatively speaking, right? However, it really depends how the relationship with the customer is structured, right? Long-term contracts are not really the norm in this industry, but there are major switching costs to move from one vendor to another. And the more sophisticated and the more vertically integrated the service provided to that customer are, the greater the cost of moving away from that relationship is. So it is a complex question. It typically, to answer that question in an M&A transaction, there's the very deep thinking involving operational, regulatory, financial considerations, and there's no a single answer. Every case, every customer, every program is different, but there's no doubt this is one of the major elements that show during the due diligence of an M&A deal when valuing a business, and we face these challenges on a daily basis in our job. There are another couple of questions here that are kind of similar to what I've answered before, but I also want to be cognizant and respectful of everybody's time. We're approaching the top of the hour, and so on behalf of Sophia, myself, the whole team, I would like to invite Nicole from Masmetic back and to give you a farewell, and greatly appreciate your participation today. And thank you as always. Please reach out if you have any questions offline.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you both. What a great conversation. I mean, Carlo's not kidding. We have probably 10 outstanding questions in there. So if your question did not get answered, please feel free to reach out to Carlo or Sophia. Their email addresses are on the screen here. They're a wealth of knowledge. Appreciate your guys' time today. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us watching this webinar. We appreciate your time as well. I encourage you to go to massmedic.com and look at all the other great events we have coming up, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Have a great day.
Nicole.